Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome in to GC Live. Kendall Smith and Jack Veltri coming at you here on Gamecock Central. Hope you're all having a fantastic day so far. Jack, I hope you're having a great day. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Kendall. It's been a very busy day for both of us, I think. But, we're here. We're ready to talk some Gamecock football. And, I hope you're doing well, too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing great. I was just telling you, we have the Minor League Baseball Business Summit here in Charlotte this week. So I've been running back and forth. It's like a mile back and forth from the field to the hotel that the event is being held in. So I've been doing that mile several times a day. And I got out of my last session at 1:45. Speed walked it back here to get on this GC Live. So super excited to be here with you today, Jack. And welcome to everybody that is tuning in from wherever you are located. We got a lot to get into here today, and we're talking a little bit more about South Carolina's loss to Ole Miss. We're previewing what's coming up this weekend with their game at Alabama. But Jack, today we heard from both of the coordinators. You wrote up a great story on that over on GamecockCentral.com. But for those who didn't get to read it, who haven't heard anything about what the coordinators had to say today, what were your overall takeaways before we break it down?
I think accountability is probably number one, right? And that was the same theme we kind of saw in yesterday's press conferences with the players and Shane Beamer is that, look, Saturday's loss to Ole Miss was easily the worst loss of the season for South Carolina, just from an execution standpoint, right? You had 2 weeks to get ready for that game, and you came out flat. You didn't look like you were ready to go, essentially. And so today, with the offense, with Dow Loggins, a lot of things went wrong on offense, and he basically owned up to it. He said, if you want to blame anyone for what went wrong Saturday, start with him. And that's how you take accountability right there, because he knows there were struggles, and he pretty much talked about it all the way through. Like, there's no real way to sugarcoat the fact that you only scored 3 points. And then from a defensive perspective, Clayton White thought the group played well, and I can totally agree with him on that because you gave up only 27 points to an Ole Miss offense that's very good. And look, there were some issues defensively with getting beaten, some coverages from time to time, and the offsides penalties were very frustrating to him. That's something I asked him about right at the end of his press conference, but it's not anything where you're mad at anyone. It's just more so just they got to work through it. They got to move on. And that's kind of the message I'm getting this week is that they need to move on from these mistakes, learn from them, and actually do something about it because you have a really tall task against Alabama this weekend.
Well, something that I picked up on specifically with Dowell Loggins was his talk about explosive plays. And that's something that you and I talked about on Sunday nights, GC Live, Sunday Reset. And he said, you kind of start to feel like you're playing small ball a little bit. And he said that they had 31 called runs. They put up some yards in that way, but you have to create explosives. And when you don't, you're never actually in control of the game. Why do you think it is, Jack, that South Carolina is having such a hard time with this? Because this isn't the first time that this has been mentioned in a coordinator's press conference. Shane Beamer has mentioned it. The media has mentioned it. South Carolina struggling to create those explosive, game-changing plays. Why is this still an issue?
I think it comes down to a few things. Number one, the receivers are not creating enough separation. That's painfully obvious at this point in the season that – look, they've got some talented receivers in that room, but for whatever reason, they're just not being able to create enough separation. Is that because of the defense that they're facing, or is that more so just a player thing? I think that's number one. Number two, the pass protection. Dowell kind of said it today. You need, if you're going to be having explosive plays in the passing game and stuff, you need to give your quarterback more time in the pocket to throw. And 6 sacks on Saturday is not going to be able to do that. And I think the other thing is Lenore Sellers, right? I think he had some good moments in that game against Ole Miss, but there were a lot of throws that he just missed on. And I think that is a worrisome issue. I don't know if it'll continue, but those are probably the three main things I would account for just the reason why they're not getting these explosive plays. And maybe it's also just the fact of the play calling, right? I think the play calling also needs to be considered into all of this. And it's not the number one issue, I don't think. I think it's more so just a lot of things going wrong, and it's all kind of snowballing together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And, you look at a team like Ole Miss, obviously a very difficult tasked to beat a team like them. South Carolina was not able to do it. You go on to the next week, you have Alabama. And with a defense like Alabama has, obviously, if you're South Carolina, as you already mentioned, so difficult to be able to be successful against a team like Alabama. Why do you think we should believe that anything could be different this week with South Carolina?
I mean, look, it's gonna be tough against this Alabama team because it's the Crimson Tide. I mean, they're coming off a loss. They're gonna be really, I think, more focused, locked in this type of game for Alabama. But I think from a South Carolina perspective, it just comes down to doing what they need to do, and I think that just starts with. I mean, look, there's so many different things that they need to do right in this game to win, but I think you have to simplify it down a little bit. Like, focus in on, okay, what went wrong in that game? And trust me, there's a lot of stuff that went wrong offensively, but what went wrong? How do you correct it this week in practice? And how does it translate over to the game? I think that's something South Carolina is figuring out this week. And I feel like that's the case every week, but especially this week after you only put up 3 points. You need to get to the root of the issue and resolve it. And for Dow Loggins, it's penalties. It's the just the inability to get the big plays going. It's just things like that. And it's the turnovers, it's the sacks, it's all those things that cause the issues for South Carolina. And that seems like what they are honing in on this week to kind of correct, to make sure that they're better offensively this week.
Yeah, and that's something that Loggins certainly touched on in today's press conference. He said before you can win, you have to stop the things that actually lose you football games, like you mentioned, the sacks, the turnovers, the penalties. But something that we have seen consistency in throughout this season with the coaching staff when they speak with the media is saying that it starts with them. It starts with the coaching staff. It starts with me. It starts with us. It seems like that's said pretty often at this point. We've heard it a few times, certainly this season. What do you make of that, Jack, and hearing that now, the couple of times that you have heard it this season?
Yeah, we've heard it a lot, especially this week, that it is, ultimately on the coaches. And I think that is where you have to start. Look, at the end of the day, I don't think it's all on the coaching in these games, win or lose. I do think it's also, just like any time you want to give praise to a player when they do something good, they also need to hear it sometimes when they don't do stuff good. I'm not saying go attack them or anything, but it's a double-edged sword to where it's not just – it's a two-way street. It's not just the coaches. I think it's the players and the execution too, because, look, the coaching can only do so much, right? They can get you as ready as possible for what's to come in the game. But if your players aren't going out there and doing what they're supposed to do, then that becomes the issue. So, yeah, it's nice to see the coaches take accountability for the fact that, look, like Matt Garner says here, you had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and you made a lot of questionable, to say the least, decisions as a coaching staff in this game. I think it showed that you weren't really ready for this Ole Miss team, and that's a problem. So in this type of game, I would say it mostly falls on the coaching. But at the same time, let's not act like the players don't have a hand in it, because, again, they are the ones on the field that make these mistakes from time to time, and it's getting to a point where it's like it's kind of a deadbeat horse at this point. It's happening over and over again, and these issues need to be resolved as fast as possible. Will it happen this weekend? I'm not sure, but you have to start somewhere, and you hope to see some progress this weekend.
Jack, you're traveling to Alabama, right?
I am.
Are you excited?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm totally pumped. Look, I've been to Bryant-Denny Stadium multiple times. I've been to Alabama so far this year a few times just because of baseball and basketball and stuff. But I'm looking forward to it. I've never covered a game at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's going to be a hopefully crazy atmosphere. And it's one that South Carolina has to be ready to go in because it's an early kick. It's 11 a.m. Central Time there, noon here. So you just hope they're ready to go and they can catch Alabama kind of off guard like Vanderbilt did.
So offensively speaking, as we stay on this topic, and this is something that we touched on a little bit on Sunday, but this game won't be easy. We've said that a million, trillion, bazillion times. If you had $1 for every time we said it, you'd be rich at this point. What can South Carolina do offensively this weekend that you think could be effective against a defense like Alabama's?
Well, I think it starts with Lenore Sellers. Everything with this offense, outside of what Dal Loggins calls, has to start with your quarterback. And I think for Lenore's, I don't think he played terrible against Ole Miss. I mean, he went 20 of 32 passing, but he had the interception in the red zone. That was a big issue. He got sacked 6 times. He made some really bad throws on some passes. So I think it starts there with him. But if there's anything you can kind of take away from what Vanderbilt did against Alabama, look at Diego Pavia, the quarterback for the Doors. He's more of a mobile guy, not afraid to take hits. He's physical, just like Alabama. And he made some big throws in that game to help the Vanderbilt offense score 40 points and ultimately win that game. That kind of sounds similar to Sellers in some sense. I don't know if his passing is fully along to where it needs to be. I don't feel like we've seen the best of what he can do as a passer, but he can run, he's physical, and he's a big kid to bring down. So I think you don't try to, I don't know, not every offense is made equal. You try to replicate some things of what worked against Alabama in that Vanderbilt game, but not a one-to-one copy because not every quarterback is made equal. But in this case, I feel like there's some similar aspects between Sellers and Pavia to where you copy a little bit of what they did, try to make sure you do that, and you can find some success. But after that, I would just say the running game needs to be better. Rocket Sanders, I don't think was fully effective really at all. You can pretty much argue that he wasn't 100% in that game. Whether he says it or not, it's just 8 carries for 29 yards wasn't enough. The run game was decent at times, but it wasn't good enough. And then, like I said before, you got to create separation as receivers. Look, Sellers had a lot of opportunities to throw, but he did take some of those plays that were passes and decided to run with it because he couldn't find a receiver open. So, look, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it this weekend against Alabama's secondary and the defense in general, which is going to be good, despite giving up 40 points to Vanderbilt, because you can never fully doubt an Alabama defense. But those 3 things, I think Sellers executing better, the run game needs to be improved, and the receivers creating separation and catching passes. I think it's easier said than done, but that is where I think it all needs to start for South Carolina.
So just a few weeks ago, Lenora Sellers did not play. It was Robbie Ashford when South Carolina took on Akron at home. And since that moment, I think it's been trying to kind of find a balance to still get Robbie Ashford involved. And Shane Beamer has talked about that as well. So obviously Lenoris is the guy right now, but what do you think that balance should look like? Because I think that's something that South Carolina is maybe trying to figure out a little bit too. You know that you have Lenoris, you know that that's your guy, but it's kind of about getting Robbie involved. Do you think that should be more? Do you think it should be less? What do you think about overall where South Carolina is at with that situation, Jack?
Well, I think they tried to figure it out last week against Ole Miss. I mean, they brought him in rather early in that game on the second drive, and of course, he went on to fumble on his only play. And after that, he didn't see the field again, at least to my knowledge and from what I remember. But I think had he not fumbled, had your confidence in Ashford not been washed away by that one play, you probably get to see a lot more of him and see what South Carolina actually had planned for him, because there were definitely plans to bring Ashford in more from what we heard from Shane Beamer and Dal Loggins and stuff. However, those plans got foiled by the fact of Ashford fumbling first play, so you're not putting him back in after that. So I get it. I think this week, I don't know if you try to run with the same thing of putting him in. It really just depends on the situation in the game. Like if it's a 4th and short situation, I think that's where, go back to the fake punt. I think the other alternative in that situation on that first drive of the game should have just been, look, if you're not confident enough in your offense out there, put in Robbie Ashford under center and let him go forward on a QB sneak and get that first down. I think it's situations like that where you could probably see him, and then maybe other special packages they have in mind for him that they didn't get to use in that Ole Miss game. But I think Lenoris has to be your guy playing majority of the snaps. And I've seen some people out there say that maybe it's time to give someone else a chance, maybe like a Davis Bevel or something. But this is Lenoris's team, and I think it's his job outside of everything else with the other offensive guys needing to do their job. It's Lenoris that needs to anchor the ship and kind of get it right, because they definitely need to rather quickly here.
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm curious your thoughts on that, because You mentioned it. Robbie Ashford fumbles his first play of the game against Ole Miss. Do you think it was fair to say, all right, you fumbled, you're not going in anymore? Do you think that was a fair
Um,
move by South Carolina?
in the heat of the moment, yes, because you can't be even chancing that stuff throughout the game. Like, look, South Carolina obviously, amongst all its issues, does seem to have a ball security issue, especially with its quarterbacks. Like, that's not the first time we've seen Robbie Ashford fumble this year. So you don't even want to run the risk of potentially having that be an issue again. So I kind of get it from the standpoint of not putting him back in. But again, he's used for certain packages, and Ole Miss took that away on the first time he got in with the forced fumble. So, and look, it was not even Ole Miss's defense that forced it. It just seemed like Ashford lost the ball while trying to fake the handoff to Rocket Sanders. So, I do expect Robbie to get more chances moving forward. I don't like I said, I don't disagree with the fact of taking him out after that and leaving Lenoris in there, but I do think Robbie's going to get another chance here, probably this weekend, and we'll see how he does with his opportunity. But ball security is probably the number one issue for him by far right now.
So something that Dowell Loggins said in his press conference earlier today, and something that you wrote as one of your bullet points on your story, which is on GamecockCentral.com, shameless plug. So be sure to go check it out because we've got a ton of content over there that I know you will all be very interested to dive into and read. But he said the message to the players is to make new mistakes and eliminate mistakes. What was the context of that?
Honestly, I didn't understand that when he said it. I was somewhat confused. Maybe I misheard him when I wrote it down, but that's kind of what I gathered. And to kind of make some sense of it, I guess what he's trying to say is like if you're in practice and you're making all these mistakes, I think it's okay to make them there rather than in the game. And so when you make them, I don't even know if this is making sense, but when you're making mistakes in practice, you try to eliminate why they happen in practice so that way they don't happen in the game. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm gathering from what he had to say there.
Well, as we continue to talk about the offense here, were there any other quotes, comments from Dowell Loggins earlier today that really stood out to you specifically, Jack?
I think just like I said before, I think just the accountability was nice to see. Look, he knows that if you're going to blame anyone for the issues, it's got to start with him, and it has to because he's the coach. Like Mike Gundy said, he's a man. He's 40. He can take it. So these players, look, they're also 18 to 22-year-old college kids. So I understand not putting the blame on them and throwing them under the bus, but at the same time, I think there are so many issues that it's not just play calling. It's the player execution. It's the false starts. It's the penalties. It's the ball security. I mean, look, there's a laundry list of issues this offense has that you can't even narrow down to one thing. So it was nice to see Dal take accountability and take the fall for a lot of the issues because it does start with him at the end of the day. But I'm really curious to see what Saturday is going to look like because right now I don't have much confidence in what the offense can do. Words only mean so much. As they say, actions speak louder than words. It's great to hear that South Carolina understands what went wrong, but at the same time, what are you going to do in the game situations on Saturday to correct it? Because it's the same story, it's the same song and dance over and over again where they know they got problems, but they never seem to be able to really fix it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not only this season. I mean, back to my first year with Gamecock Central, a junior in college, Marcus Satterfield was the offensive coordinator. And this was the year that South Carolina went to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. And the story of the offense that season, the story of the offense the next season, of course, up until the Tennessee and Clemson games were that people felt like the offense wasn't necessarily doing enough. And they felt like it was maybe a little bit bland and predictable and conservative. And I feel like we're getting some of those same comments this year. People want the explosive plays. They want to see more out of this offense. They're not seeing that. Jack, do you feel like this is something that is fixable for South Carolina?
In the long term, yeah, I do think it's fixable. This week, no, I don't think so. And I'm not trying to be Mr. Negative here or anything, but it's not so easy to, you're facing a Bama team that just came off one of its worst losses in program history. How do you think it's going to go? Alabama could come out and play flat again, or really struggle defensively in this game, and maybe South Carolina has a chance in that way. But I mean, if history shows anything, look at what happened with this Ole Miss game, right? You had the 2 weeks to prepare for it, obviously, but let's not forget Ole Miss was coming off the bad loss to Kentucky, so I think the Rebels were a little bit more fired up for this game, and they came out with a little bit more of a sense of urgency, it seemed like, and let South Carolina make mistakes. I think Alabama has to take the same approach this week. And so that's why I'm not sure if we're going to see it fixed right away. It seems like October is usually a month of horrors for this team. Go back to last year when they went winless in this month. I don't know if it's a 1 week fix, but over time, I could definitely see, like, come November and stuff, maybe they turn over play calling duties to someone else. I don't know if it continues to go downwards, but I do think at some point we're going to see these issues slowly start to resolve, because they have to. And you're not going to be able to make a bowl game, end the season the way you want, if these issues continue.
So something we talked about before the Ole Miss game was kind of figuring out what was good and what was bad about Ole Miss losing to Kentucky. There were two sides that you could have taken with that situation. It was the side of, okay, Ole Miss is beatable and you can learn from this Kentucky game and move on and see if you were able to replicate some of those things to ultimately beat Ole Miss. Obviously, that didn't happen. There was the other side of it where it's like, great, Ole Miss just lost to Kentucky. Now they're coming to face South Carolina. They're going to come into this game with a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to roll right through it. That is what we saw happened at Williams-Brice Stadium on Saturday. I think with this game this weekend against Alabama, I'm not necessarily thinking that. I don't think you are either. I'm focusing on the latter side of that. Like, this is scary, and it's not making for a great situation leading into the game, knowing that Alabama just lost to Vanderbilt, because especially at home, they are going to be going all out immediately from the jump.
I think I've heard maybe like one person that I've talked to actually thinks South Carolina has a real chance to win this game. Outside of that, and again, it's just reality here. South Carolina, I think going into this year, even before this Vanderbilt loss, I think everyone kind of chalked this game up to be a loss. And look, that's not how the players are going to approach it. They're going to think, how do you think Vanderbilt beat Alabama, right? Everyone on the outside is going to say, like, even us, like, oh, Alabama's going to wallop Vanderbilt. And then look what Vanderbilt did. They had the self-belief, and that starts with Clark Lee and stuff, and they went out and won that game. So I'm not saying that can't happen here with South Carolina, but the fact that they're going on the road to Tuscaloosa, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a ruckus environment, probably, even if it's at noon. Alabama is just a head and shoulders better football team than South Carolina right now, despite all of its issues, because they can get by with the mistakes they made. South Carolina, they haven't really shown me yet that they can get by with making all the mistakes that they did. I think South Carolina has a lot more problems than Alabama right now. So that's why I'm of the belief that South Carolina probably isn't going to win this game this weekend, though I hope I'm wrong.
Well, Jack, before we continue here on GC Live, today we have a sponsor that we definitely want to give a shout out to, and then we're going to talk all things defense and what we heard from Clayton White.
Yeah, so I want to give a shout out to our first sponsor of the day, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the need for looking for a home in this market right now, or looking to get help with your mortgage or any housing needs, Clint is your guy to get in contact with. He's been a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central, a longtime sponsor of all of the Gamecock Central live shows. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. So you're talking to someone who kind of gets it as a Gamecock fan and stuff through all the struggles and stuff. And that's the same thing in life right now with trying to buy a home. So if you're interested in getting in touch with Clint, the number to call for him is 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. You can also go to ClintHammond.com. All this information is going to be above us on screen throughout the rest of the show. So I want to thank Clint for being a longtime sponsor and supporter of Gamecock Central.
Thank you, Clint, for all of your support of GC. Really appreciate you. And obviously our presenting sponsor here on GC Live. If you tune in every day, then you certainly know that. And we are very, very grateful for all that he does for Gamecock Central. We continue to roll on here, Jack. I still want to call you Wes. Like, all the time, I just want to be like, Wes.
Do I resemble Wes?
Well, I just think it's because I'm so used to doing these shows and GC Lives and recruiting rundowns with Wes, which, by the way, we will have a recruiting rundown coming at you tomorrow or Friday. We're going to record it tomorrow. I bet it will go out on Friday. So stay on the lookout for that. Wes and I are going to talk all things recruiting with South Carolina. But before we get to recruiting, let's talk some defense. We heard from Clayton White earlier today in the coordinator's press conference, and we can talk a little bit about Ole Miss, but really I want to preview what's coming up this weekend with Alabama, what Clayton White said about Alabama. As much as we talk about the defense, you got to talk about the offense with Alabama as well. One of the top quarterbacks in the country, Jalen Milroe, he is going to be extremely difficult for South Carolina to handle this weekend. How can they possibly try to do that, Jack?
Yeah, it's a real loaded question there, but I think you have to start with, just like anything, you have to start with identifying what he's good at and what he's bad at, right? There's not really too much that he's bad at these days because he's a much better passer now compared to when he first arrived on campus at Alabama a few years ago. So far this year, he's completed 73% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 2 picks. He's been sacked 7 times, but still, he's staying off the ground. And the big thing that we've always known with him is that he's a mobile quarterback. He is a very tough guy to bring down, kind of as Clayton White talked about in his press conference today. I mean, Milroe's almost got 300 yards on the ground. He leads the team in touchdowns with 9. So he's a very explosive kind of guy. I think the thing we always knew about him, like I said, is the fact that he can run. But you add in the fact that, look, he almost threw for 400 yards passing against Georgia. And then he followed it up last week against Vanderbilt with a 300-yard passing game, despite some struggles. But overall, he's come so far along as a dual threat quarterback that I think you can't really prepare for one thing with him. You have to be ready for the fact of he can throw now too, and he can do it consistently. And I look at it this way. I think he is where Lenore Sellers should eventually get. That is what you should be striving for right there, because we see Sellers right now. He's kind of like what Milroe was in year 1 at Alabama, where Jalen wasn't the best passer in the world. He had to rely a lot more on his legs to do the work, and then the passing came along over time. I kind of see some similar attributes like with Lenore's here, and it should be a great matchup on Saturday. I don't know how South Carolina's going to be able to stop a guy that is this good. No one really has been able to this year. But again, if your offense is able to go out and score more points than them, just like Vanderbilt did, it can be done even if you're not able to fully slow down that offense.
We know how prolific the Ole Miss offense is. And so I think for South Carolina to hold them to 27 points was pretty impressive. And Clayton White talked about that. Also, not to mention the situations that the defense was put in. I mean, we'll just start off by talking about, once again, the fake punt. We don't want to bring it up anymore because we have talked about it. But when a situation like that happens, your defense has to come out there. Obviously, Ole Miss has great field position. At that point, you're putting your defense in a really tough situation. What did Clayton White say the mindset has to be in those type of situations, Jack?
Yeah, so I'm going back and looking at what he had to say, but I think it's, he was disappointed in the fact that I guess they really weren't ready for sudden change early in the game. And look, it's going to happen where your defense is put in these bad spots, especially by South Carolina with the ridiculous fake punt. But it happened, and the defense was really set back because they had to get a stop, and Ole Miss is already in Carolina territory before you can even snap the ball. So that was an issue right there. And the fact that they fell behind by 2 touchdowns so quick, like he said, really put their back up against the wall. So, they've come back with the right attitude this week, apparently, according to Clayton, and they've had a few intense practices, but their job is to attack. They got to make sure their mindset is correct. And, like he said, you don't really have much time to worry about playing in the short field or wherever you are on defense. You have to treat it all the same. And so I think that's the key for the defense this week. Look, they had a pretty, I don't want to say great game against Ole Miss because you gave up 27 points and you lost. But I will say the defense keeps you in games. And as long as the offense starts to figure it out some, you got to like your chances with this defense every time out.
I want to take a moment here to reset. I know you do Sunday resets after every game, but I really want to take a second here to just pause, reflect, take a step back, and really think about this defense as a whole. We talk about a lot of the specific situations with this defense, a lot of game-specific things, but for this defense, based on what you've seen throughout the season, so far. Where do you feel like they stand compared to what you thought they would be preseason?
That's a great question. I think the defense overall has been much better than I expected. I figured based on the way they played in those final 4 games of the year last year, I know it's different roster, but it's still the same coach and most of the same personnel. They carried it over so far in this season. And look, I figured that they'd be able to keep the offense in games more times than not. This was the case going back all the way to fall camp when the defense had been talked so well about. It's not really surprising. They have been able to keep South Carolina in games. And so I don't want to say they're over exceeding expectations, but they definitely have surprised me a little bit with just how well they play at times. The turnovers haven't been able to come in bunches lately. You're getting a few here and there. Ole Miss, I don't even think you had a turnover, but I think it's going to come over time. It's just you're finding the right way to get players in and out of the game. You have a lot of veterans on this team, especially on the defensive line. You have Kyle Kennard. You have Dylan Story, who really blossomed into fantastic, just in the overall in the grand scheme of college football, some of the best edges or defensive ends in college football. And so that is where it starts. And then the secondary's played well from time to time, despite getting burned on some occasions. The linebackers have been good. So overall, it's a nicely painted picture with a few scratches here and there. But I think overall, they have played very well. And like I said before, and I'll say it again, they continue to keep you in the ball game.
So some people have talked about this in the comment section, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. They say if the offense can stay on the field, it will help the defense. How much do you worry about the defense from a rest perspective, from just being able to kind of have a moment during games to sit back without having to stress that it's going to be a 3 and out or a turnover or a fake punt that gives the other team great field position, and then all of a sudden you're in a terrible position as the defense? How much do you really worry about that on a game-to-game basis, Jack?
I think you have to worry about it a little bit. At the same time, though, you go back to the Ole Miss game, despite the fact that the offense only put up 3 points. And I know it doesn't really matter, but it matters from the standpoint of keeping the defense off the field from time to time. They controlled the time of possession, 32 minutes, 27 minutes. So South Carolina won that battle, but at the same time, they did have their 3 and outs. They struggled on third down. It is a little concerning that it continues to be an issue for this offense, and not to make it all about the offense, but when you're not able to put together sustainable long drives and you're going 5-6 plays and then you're done, it can become tiring and taxing on the defense. And look, we know with them, they have to be at their best so that way the offense can stay in the game. And if the defense is not, we haven't really seen a game this year where the defense hasn't played super well or just given up like 50 points. Maybe that changes this weekend and the whole narrative changes a little bit. But overall, the defense is what helps South Carolina win games. And so I feel like at some point maybe it'll wear a little bit on them. They'll get a little mentally tired and stuff, just tired in general. But it really needs to start with the offense being more productive. If the offense is any bit productive, like they had been in these first 4 games moving forward, I think you can find a lot more success just overall.
South Carolina's defense has been able to give them somewhat of an edge at times this season. In the past, another area of the game that has been able to give South Carolina some edge, and we haven't really talked about it a ton, at least on our version of GC Live, is special teams. And I hate that we don't get our Pete Lembo press conferences anymore.
I hate that too.
It is heartbreaking, like genuinely, like the best press conferences in the world were given by Pete Lembo. Like you would ask a question about anything, and then the next thing you know, you're talking about like United States history, and he's going off on a rant.
Who he is, and we love it. We miss him. He is the best.
We do. We hope Pete is doing well out there. But yeah, we don't get those press conferences anymore. Don't get to talk, I think, as much about special teams as we have in the past. Beamer ball, it's been branded. We know what South Carolina has been able to do in terms of special teams. Are you underwhelmed this year with the way that that phase of the game has impacted the overall game for South Carolina?
I'll say so. I'll say yes. Kai Kroger, I think he's been good. I know people are out there going to say he hasn't been good this year, but I think overall, for what you get out of him, he's done a pretty good job, especially in this last game when he's averaging about 51 yards per punt along with 61. I think the bigger issues are look at what South Carolina is doing in the punt return game. They aren't doing that much. That has been an issue. Kick returns have been so. I haven't really remembered a big kick return that they've had so far this year where they're cutting it up and they're going for 30, 40 yards because, again, maybe that's part of why South Carolina just isn't able to get much going offensively is the fact that they're always seemingly starting out at the 25-yard line because they let the ball, go for a touchback more times than not. We haven't seen that big return yet, and they've got a lot of guys that can go out there and do the kick returns and punt returns and stuff. We just haven't seen that one guy make it really happen yet, at least from what I remember. And look, Alex Herrera has been fine kicking this year. I know he missed from 38 yards this past weekend, but that shouldn't tarnish what he's done overall. Again, he's not in that position if South Carolina could figure out how to execute well enough on third downs, and maybe you're not in that situation. Let's think about it that way. But I think overall, special teams are special teams. You'd like to see more out of them. The fake punt, whether it was good or not, it was a weird play call at the beginning of the game, in my opinion. I don't care how good Shane Beamer felt about it. He should have called a timeout as soon as he saw. Because the issue is that South Carolina was supposed to be getting quick to the ball, but they weren't. Then there, should have called a timeout, reset what you're going to do, go from there. He didn't do that, and it ended up costing them. So we haven't seen like the big Beamer ball play. Obviously, Maurice Brown's blocked punt a few weeks ago was great and all, but overall, I think there's still a little bit of that magic that we've seen in the past few years that's kind of missing a little bit right now.
I'm curious, going back to what you were just talking about, South Carolina seemingly starting at the 25-yard line more often than not. Who do you think that guy can be based on what you've seen as a punt returner to give South Carolina just a little bit more there? Like,
yeah.
I would 25 yards.
I know it's like it's something you don't even really. I haven't really thought about it honestly, but like I'm thinking back on it now because we haven't really gotten to talk about special teams on this show much because we don't hear from Joe DeCamillis really at all outside of like the beginning of the year. It's been a lot of like, and credit to the kickers on the other teams, but they're booting the ball back into the end zone, and South Carolina doesn't take it back. I think that's more of just something they can't control, but at the same time, it's like they haven't really had that big explosive kick return yet. Now, who would I like to see be that guy? It seems like it's like your Jalen Kilgore's, your Juju McDowell's, your guys like that. Gage Larvadane's another one. Bunch of your receivers, essentially. I know he gets talked about a lot as someone that everyone would like to see step up at receiver, and I'll bring him up here. Nick Harbor. I mean, that'd be pretty cool to see him returning kicks and stuff. And I know it's like something you just laugh about, but it's like he's got all this God-given speed. And I know it's not easy as, running up and down the field and stuff. You have to have blockers in front of you. All 10 guys besides him have to do their job. But it would be great to see what he can do in the return game a little more often if they were kicking to him. I don't even remember how many times he's been on the field for kick returns. It's probably not been a ton, but that would be something where I'd like to see some of that track speed really put to the test because, again, kick returners, punt returners, what are they known for? Their speed. That's why you see a lot of guys in the NFL that are primarily great kick punt returners, like a Pharaoh Cooper, for instance, from eons ago. So it's stuff like that where I'd like to see a guy like Nick, who maybe isn't doing a ton in the receiving game, can get involved in other ways.
Well, now that you bring it up, let's talk about Nick Harbor because we haven't talked
about it. We
opened
up a can of worms here.
We haven't talked about it in a while, and I'm just speaking on behalf of the fan base. Okay, I know that this is something that the fan base, a lot of you, are passionate about, and you want to see more from Nick Harbor. In fact, okay, I told you the story about how I was at a baseball game a few weeks ago, one of our last games of the season, and this guy that had nothing to do with South Carolina, wasn't a fan, didn't go there, wasn't really keeping up, was talking to me about what I do, and I mentioned GC, and he was like, what about that guy, Nick Harbor? Like, I don't know much about South Carolina, but why is he not more involved? And then I'm sitting at the game on Saturday, and I'm there with my boyfriend, who's an Ohio State fan. He went to Ohio State, played lacrosse there, and he doesn't keep up too much with South Carolina just through me. And he's like, why is Nick Harbor not getting more opportunities?
Oh, man.
Why? And should fans be concerned? Like, this is a question that people want to know, and we are not going to have all the answers, right? We're not the coaches. We're not sitting in the room. We're not making the decisions, but like, this was someone that people were so excited about, and he's not getting a ton of opportunity.
I'm
Why?
gonna tell you exactly why he's not getting a ton of opportunity. And look, he's starting to get a few more targets here and there. But here's the most concerning part about his game, right? I can't remember the exact specific moment in the game. And I'm not going to pull up the clip on here because we're going to get copyrighted if so. So I'll tell it like it is. It was a short pass to Nick. Some point in that game against Ole Miss, it was like a dump off to the outside. And Nick, he catches it, but it's a whole process of him bobbling it before he brings it down. It's a simple throw. He's got gloves on that are probably sticky enough to catch the ball. A guy like him struggling to catch the football compared to other receivers, that's why you don't see him out there being the leading receiver in this offense. Not a knock on him. It's just the fact of the matter is that he's got issues catching the football for whatever reason. And that has been the case throughout his time at South Carolina. And look, I know everyone wants to see him in there and go run a go route and run a straight vertical and just blow by a DB and stuff. Let's also face it, DBs in the SEC, for the most part, are very good. And the other thing is, I've had this conversation a million times now, but it's like the video game has done no good for him. It's a great thing to have him in the video game and doing all he does, but it's like everything he does in that video game has kind of set him up for failure because people have that expectation in their heads that they can't get it out of, is that Nick is supposed to be this all-time receiver, 82 overall, whatever you may have it, and he's the leading receiver for South Carolina with like 200 yards each game. That is just not realistic, and you see it reflected in the numbers this year. He's only got 7 catches for 51 yards, and so it's not as simple as life is not a video game, and you see the struggles with him catching the football. That is part of the problem with him, and there are just other receivers out there that are more developed than him. And I will say this, to kind of continue here, he's a 5-star athlete. Again, 5-star athlete that played defense in high school. It was always going to be a long-term project to get him to switch over to receiver full-time. And so it's not like he was this amazing receiver in high school. Like if he was a 5-star receiver in high school, we're having a different conversation right now. If he's struggling like this, then you can kind of point to, well, it just didn't work out. There is still hope that it can. He's only in his sophomore year, and as long as he sticks around at South Carolina for the long haul, maybe you see him finally develop. Again, his focus is also on track at times, which I've seen people say, like, hey, maybe just put all your time into football, and that way you can be the best receiver possible. But again, it doesn't always work that way. He can put in all the time he wants, but if he's not able to catch the football consistently, no matter how many times he goes to the jug machine, it's just not going to work. So, and I know we have a question here. See anything from Harbor? Have we seen a deep pass to him on a wide open deep, other receiver cutting below to help open him up? I haven't seen anything like that really yet. The only deep ball I remember off the top of my head is the one against Florida last year. But even then, he had to go back for it and try to catch the ball. Moss, the defender. So, look, we've spoken about it a lot of times before. Nick just hasn't come along the way we thought. Maybe eventually he will, but again, right now it just hasn't seemed like he's been. He's not the most reliable target in that offense, and it's just the fact of the matter is he hasn't come along fully as a receiver yet.
Well, obviously, Nick is someone that people want to see getting involved more in these games, Jack. And I'm curious, who else? Like, who else are some of those names that come to your mind, whether it's on offense or defense, guys that you would like to see be a little bit more involved from South Carolina side of things?
Yeah, I mean, Nick definitely is one guy. Like, let's not get that twisted. I do want to see him get involved more in this offense. Like, he got 6 targets last week, so there is an obvious idea of, look, we want to get the ball to him more. It's just not working out consistently so far. I want to see more of the run game be good, right? And I think that starts with Rocket Sanders getting back to what he is. He's a great running back, but he's a little banged up right now, so it hasn't been perfect. The guys around him in that running back room, Oscar Attaway has been fine. He had a decent game last week, but it's nothing that I'm like, wow, like this guy is 100-yard rusher every game, and that's just not realistic sometimes. You can't expect that every game. But I would like to see more from Oscar Attaway because I know there's more in there, more in the toolbox. Jawarn Howell, I want to see more from him too because I've loved what he's been doing so far in the run game. I've also seen people throw around the name Matthew Fuller a little bit, the freshman running back. They want to see more from him too. I just don't know if that'll happen because he's only played in 1 game so far. if he's going to redshirt this year, he can only play in 3 more games. You kind of have to be selective with when you use him, though he has been on the travel roster and just the roster in general every single game so far. So I would like to see more guys get involved in the running back room like they have been, but do more with your opportunities.
So some of the questions that we're getting or some of the comments, why wouldn't you move Nick Harper to linebacker? Would love to see him play edge. Why not? I mean, he's a 5-star athlete. Like, what do you think? You don't see him playing defense for South Carolina?
Yeah, but that's something that doesn't happen mid-season. No way. Unless he's been working at it and we just don't know about it. There's no way you could throw him out there right now. I don't care how long. I don't care how good he was back in high school. High school is a completely different game compared to college. So if that's something you're going to do, that has got to be an off-season project. And even at this point in his career, I can't see that switch being made. It may be easier for him to just go out there and play defense. But again, it's just like switching to receiver. It's going to be a project. It's going to take time to – it's like it's not as easy as riding a bicycle and picking it back up again, I don't think. It's going to take time. And look, South Carolina's in a pretty good spot with its edge rushers. It's got, Brian Thomas, Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart, JT Gear, guys like that are very good off the edge that I don't even know if they really need Nick out there. I'd rather see this thing through. If you're already 2 years into Nick as a receiver, you may as well stick with it because it would really stink to see all this time and effort put into him becoming a good receiver just go to the waste because everyone gave up on him too early. I want to see this through and see him become maybe a full-fledged receiver. I've seen people throw the Xavier Luedecke comparison out there and how long it took him to become this elite receiver by his final year at South Carolina, and now he's in the NFL with the Panthers. Maybe it's something like that where it just takes time to get him going. That's the comparison I've seen a lot of people throw out there.
Well, Jack, before we get out of here on GC Live, any final thoughts, comments that you would like to throw out there?
Yeah, we do have a few questions that we try to get to them throughout the show, so we'll answer a few of them here. But we'll start with Frederick Cooper. At some point, do you take away playing time for repeated penalties? Depends on the penalty. Like the Dylan Stewart situation, I think is the main one we're getting at here. I don't think you bench him. I don't know if you even suspend him, to be honest. I think you just whatever happened during practice this week with punishment or whatever and talking to him, it's obviously seemingly got to his head that he can't do that sort of stuff again. And in case you missed it, he had the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for pretending to shoot a gun at Jackson Dart, Ole Miss's quarterback. It happened. You move on, and you hope it doesn't happen again. But penalties in general, I don't know. I don't know about playing time. Are we having this conversation about Kyle Kennard if he continues to get penalties? I don't think so because he's one of your top players. But unless it's like unsportsmanlike conduct penalties happening over and over again, I don't think so. Kendall, do you want to get this question here?
What do you do about penalties? Because it is always being said that we need to clean the penalties up, but it doesn't seem like they are getting cleaned up. I think that's been the story of the season up until this point. And you kind of just touched on it, Jack. It's not necessarily something where you can bench your players like Kyle Kennard for that, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I don't know. And look, we hear it every single week. Like, we're going to get better. We're going to get better. We're going to clip the penalties. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We heard it today again with Dowell Loggins and Clayton White. I don't know. Again, it just feels like maybe I'm wrong on this, Kendall, so you can comment on it. But like, does it feel like it's just part of South Carolina's identity at this point in the year where you kind of just have to live with it?
I feel like you shouldn't have that as your mindset, especially. No. And I don't think the team does. Like, maybe are you talking in terms of like the fan base needs to live with it? Like, just kind of understand that that's what it is. I hope that that's not the way people think, but I understand the frustrations because every week it is the same story that we're talking about over and over and over again. So, what can you do to mitigate that? What can you do to try to make sure that South Carolina is being a little bit more disciplined? I wish I was getting paid all that money to give you the answers as the coaches.
I know. And look, you're right. Like the players obviously don't think that way. But I think for us on the outside, it's kind of like you kind of have to expect like, hey, South Carolina is going to just be one of those penalized teams in 2024. And that's just the reality of it. Can it change? Obviously. Can they go into this Alabama game and have zero penalties and maybe like one or two? Yeah, that's definitely possible and changes your entire perception of how penalized this team has been. But again, I think for right now, you kind of just have to live with it. And for the players, they're trying to get better with it. But the next question we got 2 more here, and then we'll get out of here. Is there any way Dowell can work with Lenoris to rid him of mostly of the high or overthrowing the receivers? Yeah, and I think that's just something that, look, Dowell is also the quarterback coach here. Like, he and Mike Shula are probably working with him day by day to make sure he's more accurate with his throws. Now, what does that mean? Do they do more throws in practice? Are they work? How do you like? They're working on his accuracy and stuff. I can't speak for what they do because I'm not there at practice, but I can assure you they're definitely working on it every day. And Lenoris recognizes it too. He knows his throws have been a little off the target, and so they need to be better. And kind of going off that, we got our final question here from ABNRGR75. Thoughts on Sellers? His passing is terrible. No pocket presence. Gosh, this is as brutal as it gets. Holds the ball too long. Doesn't throw it away. When he's outside the pocket, he takes the loss. Why not try the guy from Oklahoma? Yeah, I've heard this question before with Davis Bevel being thrown in there. Kendall, you read the game on Saturday. We talked about this a little bit on Sunday Reset. What do you think about Sellers right now, where he's at, and what do you hope to see from him in this game?
Well, he's not getting a lot of help. I'll say that for one thing. Like, it's so easy to blame the quarterback in every situation. And I'm not sitting here and saying that everything Lenoris Sellers has done this year has been perfect in 10 out of 10, but it's not like he's getting a ton of help from the offensive line, from his receivers, creating separation, as we've talked about plenty of times on this show. So he's young. He's going to have to develop. Unfortunately, there are going to be growing pains when it comes to that. And I think that we're seeing that right now. And I also think that it's not 100% on Lenoris Sellers, the problems that we're seeing with this offense. It could be the play calling. It could be the receivers. It could be the offensive line. Does he make some decisions sometimes where you're like shaking your head a little bit and wondering what maybe was going on? Of course. But I think any freshman quarterback is going to do that. And guys who are juniors and seniors are going to do that as well. So I'm going to defend Lenoris a little bit here and say that I don't think that he's a guy that needs to be taking 100% of the heat for what we're seeing here offensively. And I'm not saying people are trying to do that, but I do think that maybe that was a little bit of a brutal critique.
That was a real rough assessment. And look, I'll be one of the first to say, like, Lenoris hasn't been living up to the expectations I think many have had. I totally can see that. His passing really, despite what the numbers may tell you, he did miss on a lot of these throws last week against Ole Miss. I don't think he's that far off from getting back to where he was in that LSU game. I mean, they put up 24 points in the first half. The offense in general isn't that far away. And that's not what you want to hear probably, but, like, it's true. They just have to get back to doing that. And it starts by, it's going to take some time, I think, but cleaning up all the miscues that they have. And it is what it is. And final question here, 11 Football says, am I wrong for wishing he'd throw more picks as opposed to holding onto the ball and then scrambling every drive? I get that. Maybe you want to run the risk of him throwing it a little bit more. But I think at the same time, for confidence sake, you probably just want him to – look, there's going to be times where he's going to throw the ball and throw interceptions. It just hasn't happened yet, and that's a good thing. At the same time, though, you don't want him holding on the ball forever and taking sacks and stuff. And part of that also is the guys around him, like Kendall said. It's not all on him. And so I think he'll be all right, but the rest of the offense also has some work to do, just like him and Al Loggins, to correct this thing, because it's not just a one-man show.
Well, Jack, before we get out of here, we got one more sponsor that we want to give a big thank you to for helping us to present GC Live.
Yeah, it's our good friends over at Prize Picks. So Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players' stat projections. And then, of course, you watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've had the pleasure of using the Prize Picks app many times in the past when I want to get involved in the game and stuff, and I can fully recommend that it is a great way to get involved, especially during this month of October where hockey's starting up officially. NBA is right around the corner, and that's always a great way to get involved there. It's a fun way to do so. College football, NFL, Major League Baseball postseason's going on right now. So the opportunities are endless. So you just go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app and use the code GC on screen. That stands for Gamecock Central to get a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups. And we want to thank PrizePicks for always being a wonderful sponsor, our newest one, in fact, of Gamecock Central Live programs.
You sweating for tonight? Yankees Royals 708.
Shoot, man. Yeah, I really am, Kendall. And honestly, like, look, with this Yankee team, I won't be on a whole tangent here. Clark Schmidt's pitching tonight. Former Gamecock, as everyone knows, he really has to throw the ball well. But it's not just him. The offense has stunk so far. So, Aaron Judge, if you're listening, if you're out there, John Carlos Stanton, Juan Soto, whoever on this offense, because it's everyone, get it going, please. From a diehard Yankee fan here, I need this for my sanity.
The Yankees should win. Like
they should. The payroll is quadruple whatever the Royals is. And look, you lost a game. It happens, but move on. You should win the series. No excuses.
Well, we won't get into a whole Yankees discussion, but it's my weekly check-in with Jack as he goes through the emotional roller coaster that is the New York Yankees in the postseason. To all of you that still have a team left in baseball postseason, good luck to you tonight. We appreciate all of you joining us here on GC Live South Carolina, taking on Alabama on the road this Saturday. Stay up to date, GamecockCentral.com. Follow us at Gamecock Central on social media. For Jack Veltri, I'm Kendall Smith. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And thanks for joining us here on GC Live.